Okay, I want to make this video for a couple of reasons. One is I think there are a few misconceptions about what people's rights are when dealing with the police and how they should approach these rights. And also, I think some people think that I am not appreciating what police officers do. And I have to say that, I understand that being a police officer is a very demanding job. It's not something I would want to do. It means dealing with people who are assholes all the time. And it means keeping your cool when other people do not. I think that's definitely a big part of the job. I completely understand why some police officers find themselves having a hard time choosing between using some slightly shady methods of getting people to choose to give up their rights, which is legitimate, though, like I say, a little bit shady, and the slightly more forceful using lies to build a case. And usually it's only the beginning of a case. And in a lot of these cases, you'll find an illegal search leads to finding illegal evidence, which then, after talking to the suspect, you convince them that admitting to this evidence is to their advantage because they will get off more leniently. And so what you've done is you've taken illegally found evidence, which would have been thrown out of trial, convinced the suspect to admit to crimes based on evidence that could not be used in trial, and then use their confession to convict them. So what you've done is basically, without ever having quite violated the law, or at least not in any way that can be brought up in court, because once there's a confession, that's bulletproof. There's no longer a case there for the defendant. And this is the sort of thing that I think cops find themselves faced with a lot. I don't think it's a simple question. Yeah, I think that in a way it's a problem that I think the biggest problem is that people are not aware of their rights. The reason we have the rights that we have is because legally people have decided that we should have these rights, that these rights are what we need to protect us from unlawful, or rather maybe sort of overpowered criminal justice system, which would take advantage of us not having these rights if we didn't have them. So I think that to exercise these rights is something that every citizen should be doing. They should know their rights and they should be using them. And police officers who are trying to go around them, I think that as long as they're doing it in a way that's legal, I have no problem with that, because it's their responsibility to catch criminals, and they need to do the best job they can. And I think it's a citizen's job to know their rights and to exercise those rights. And the interplay of the powers that police are given and the rights that citizens are given are what is supposed to make up our criminal justice system, what's supposed to give us this balance of, like I say, rights against governmental authority. Where do you draw the line? Well, the idea is that this interplay of power and rights is supposed to give us the desired effect. So again, I think it's a responsibility on both sides. I don't envy cops. They have a hard job. And that doesn't mean I'm excusing them from the specific cases where there is shown to be brutality, things like that. I think those are definite real issues. But I'd like to say that I'm not saying that all cops are this way. However, I think these are some problems that need to be addressed. A big part of this video I'd like to say is I'm going to plug a video that I watched myself a long time ago. That is absolutely brilliant. It's a talk given by a law professor for the first half hour, and then there's a second half hour that is the response given by a veteran police officer to the talk given by the law professor. The law professor is talking about the importance of Fifth Amendment rights, our right not to answer questions in any circumstance in which we're being asked by a police officer or anyone else. We're allowed to refuse to answer any questions that we think may incriminate us. And any defense attorney will tell you, do not ever talk to police. And this law professor gives the same argument, and then what's interesting is The next half hour is a talk given by a veteran police officer, and he not only says, yeah, he's right, you do not want to talk to the cops under any circumstances, it will not help you, but he goes on to elaborate, giving specific examples of ways that he manipulates suspects into weakening their legal position because they do not understand their rights, they do not know the protections that they are entitled to, and, well, etc. So, very interesting talk. I recommend it to everyone. I'm going to throw a link in the sidebar. Not really practiced with this whole pointing sideways thing. Anyway, so just briefly, I'd like to say a couple things. People have this idea that acting suspicious denies you your rights, and they have this weird idea of what is acting suspicious. Well, it turns out that if a police officer asks you a question like, how are you today? Well, many defense attorneys will actually tell you. If a cop so much as asks you the simplest question, tell them you'd rather not answer it, and if they need you to answer it, they can talk to your attorney, etc. So you can answer the simplest questions with, I'd rather not talk about that. And some people will say, oh, well, that's suspicious. It shows that this person's up to something. Well, regardless, that is your right, and you cannot say that someone is being suspicious because they are exercising their rights. Or at least, rather, that is not a grounds for probable cause. That is not legally allowed as a reason for suspicion. So telling a cop that you don't want to talk to them about something, that you don't want to answer their questions, is perfectly legitimate, and by the very structure of our legal system, needs to be given credence. You can't be saying that somebody is a bad person because they don't want to answer questions from the police. People don't realize how often this happens. They really don't. Exactly what I said before. You find illegal evidence, use the illegal evidence to pressure a suspect who does not know their rights. They give you a confession, you take him to court, and you win based on a confession, which, like I say, once there's a confession, it's bulletproof. It doesn't matter if the evidence that you threaten them with is not admissible in court. So these are issues that I think everyone should be aware of. And if you think you know a lot about not talking to cops, if you know what your rights are, well, that's nice. I still think you should check out this video. Okay, and one last thing. My problem with this whole pastor thing that my last video was about is whether or not this is what happened in this case. This is something that does happen. People are intimidated out of their rights. It's one thing for someone to be unaware of their rights, but it's entirely another for someone to be afraid of physical violence because they are unwilling to give up their rights. If a cop asks to speak to you, if a cop asks you questions, you should be able to say, I don't want to answer your questions are not appropriate, I don't want to answer them. If you cannot say that without being afraid of physical violence, there is something wrong with the system. If you are in danger because you exercise your rights, then those rights are not being fairly addressed. They're not being given to you. You do not have a right to refuse to answer a police officer if you feel like you are in danger when you refuse to answer a police officer. So, whether or not in this case the cops were telling the truth, maybe they had probable cause, maybe they didn't, I wasn't there. I'm not going to make claims about that. In my last video, I referred to an illegal search a couple times. What I was saying in that case, I was taking the pastor's word for it. I'm not saying that's what happened. And I said that in my video. I wasn't there. I don't know what the circumstances were, but given his side of the story, he was perfectly, it was perfectly legitimate for him to refuse to answer questions. It was wrong if he felt like he was in physical danger for refusing to answer questions. If they decided he was suspicious because he refused to answer questions, and then used physical violence to take him out of the car because he exercised his rights, that is wrong, period. Bullying is something that circumvents your rights, and it absolutely has to be accepted as something that is illegal. This cannot be allowed. And so, while I cannot say for sure what happened in this video, I know that it is very easy to feel physically intimidated in the presence of a police officer because they become upset that you are unwilling to answer questions that they feel you should be answering. It is your right not to answer them. You should not be in physical danger for exercising your rights. Period. Ever. And that was my point in my last video, and that's the point I want to wrap up with here. Your rights only are valid so long as you are able to safely exercise them. Anyway, thank you.